Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Future Construct podcast. I am your host, Amy Peck, and today we will be talking to Johnny Fortune, who is the BIM Program Director at the National Institute of Building Sciences. Welcome, Johnny.
Thank you, Amy. Very pleased to be here.
So, first of all, would it be okay if I used your last name occasionally? Because I think your name, like the last name Fortune, I think it's the best name ever.
Well, I get that a lot, so sure, you can interject it where appropriate.
Fantastic. So before we kind of, you're working on so many different things, and you have a great purview from where you sit at NIBS. But I'd like to also just talk about, how did you get into this industry? Was it a family affair, or is it just something that you loved?
Yeah, sure. I actually grew up in a construction family, small construction family. So even as a teenager, I was always around the job site, sometimes working on the weekends, obviously working during the summer. And so I've just really been around construction all my life. And then at some point, when I entered into adulthood, I wanted to start working on the design side, and start developing the design as opposed to just constructing. And so I worked the last 20 years in the design community, and throughout that, just saw a lot of inefficiencies in the industry, as many know has been well reported. The low productivity in the construction industry has been an ongoing problem, and so just embraced that problem and started looking for different ways to bring about improvements, getting involved in different initiatives, and it's kind of what led me to the work that I've done over the past decade in terms of helping to write standards to improve processes and bring about efficiencies and productivity to the design and construction industry.
So let's start with, what do you attribute the kind of slow adoption rates and the inefficiencies to? Because it's not lack of standards; it's that's what you're working on. So, what are some of the challenges that come? Is it just like it's just such a behemoth of an industry that it's hard to get it to change direction?
It is, and we have here in the U.S. We don't have one agency a government agency that's responsible for public design of public buildings and construction of public buildings. We have a lot of agencies, so it is quite complicated. We have a lot of different project types, from residential to commercial. It's not like the automotive industry where we can easily just take it and put it into a large warehouse and standardize on every piece and create a production line. That's Even though that's been envisioned for the construction industry and offsite construction, there's some pieces that are productivity enhancing to offsite construction. It is a behemoth of an industry that is fast moving. It is often a very litigious industry. Some of the contract types for the industry are really not developed to a point that encourages collaboration and encourages and rewards productivity. So I think there's multiple factors. I don't think we can pinpoint one of those. I think there's the challenges of working with so many different owner types, so many different project types, so many different authorities that have jurisdiction that is not centralized. And then as technology has evolved over the past 20 years, and it's evolved rather rapidly, there are the standards that help define using that technology has always lagged behind, and so it's very difficult to get to realize the efficiency, the productivity gains that are promised through many of the applications and technologies that we've seen hit the market.
And since you've been focused on standards, what are some of the standards that you've seen, kind of come about and enacted in the past, let's say, decade, that you think have been really, really impactful? And how do we rinse and repeat?
Yeah, I think one of the most impactful standards was ISO 19650. It's an international standard. It was a lot of that work of that standard was developed in the UK. And again, that's a different governmental structure. They do have a centralized uh, group that really handles the construction, the design and construction of publicly funded properties. And so I think that's been very impactful. I think it's got the attention of the world. And I think here in the US, we're looking at that standard and saying, well, how can we create an annex, or how can we create a mapping? Because we use a different terminology. We use, we have different processes, but there's certainly some advantages to trying to be able to adopt that. And I think that's one of the key pieces we're working on going forward, is how do we adopt that? How do we integrate that into our US economy and our complex design and construction industry here?
And then what are some of the standards that the industry is kind of longing for, that are just in process? I mean, it's a long process to get standards ratified. Is that correct? Can you walk us through that, just sort of a high level of what that process is, and then maybe let's talk about what's coming.
Sure. So that process is typically a 3 to 5 year process. So it's inherent in the traditional nature of developing standards that they always run behind in terms of the emerging technology. So the standards are always trying to catch up with what is being done in practice. We do have a fair amount of standards that's been developed that are around information exchange and data, and defining what those data requirements are. But the biggest need, and the thing that I've heard over the last decade, speaking at a lot of conferences, talking to a lot of people in the industry, the biggest need it still seems to be on the practitioner end. Practitioners have they have this desire. They want to be able to open up a standard and read it and immediately plug it into their day-to-day processes. And unfortunately, I think that is a piece that is missing, a very practical guideline to implementing BIM. What does digital twin mean for them? How are they making the transition from traditional design and documentation and handover to more advanced digital transformative handover and documentation? So that's where the rubber meets the road. It is the people doing the work. I still feel that they don't have quite the guidance and the tools and the ease of use to be able to apply it day to day.
Is
And
that down to training?
so some of it is training, some of it's education, some of it is that there are gaps, there are holes in the standards that exist today. Even though we do have a lot of standards, we've got a lot of organizations that have worked to develop some standards. It does seem as though that the practitioner and the practical guidance on how to implement it seems to be missing.
And then, you're focused on BIM. Why is there not broader adoption on BIM? I mean, I think I asked this question to everyone, but I mean, it seems a little obvious that this would be much more efficient, and yet it seems challenging to kind of bring it into some work environments.
Well, I think the key stakeholder for success for any project is obviously the owner. They have the most to gain. They have the capital expenses that they're putting forth for any given project. They bear the most risk of any stakeholder, and they are that they are experiencing the most information deficit. So even though the BIM has been adopted on multiple levels, it's been adopted by a lot of AEs, it's been adopted by a lot of GCs and trades folks. Ultimately, owners in general as a whole are not necessarily driving the adoption of BIM. And whatever the owner says in their requirements, that's what the project teams and the construction teams are going to deliver. So we've not seen broad adoption from owners. We do have exemplaries that have gone all in and wants to be disruptive in their own process and push technology and adopt BIM and digital twin. But for the most part, the majority of owners have simply not adopted it. And I would say it really goes back to, I don't know that we've done a great job as an industry as a whole, really communicating the value to the owner. We've done a lot of communicating about value to the design team. We've done a lot of communicating about value during construction. But when we think about the capital expense of any given project, it's it's generally reported that it's less than 10% of the total cost of ownership. So the piece we've really not tapped into very well across the nation and world is really to communicate this high level of value that comes with having good data for the owner for the total cost of ownership, so they can use throughout the life cycle of any given project.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think the economics of that are incredibly important and strong. I want to come back to that, but we're going to take a little momentary break, and we're going to hear from our sponsors, and we will be right back. All right, welcome back to the Future Construct podcast. We are speaking with Johnny Fortune from the National Institute of Building Sciences. And we're talking a little bit about standards and digital twin. The elephant in the room for the last, little over a year has been Meta changing or Facebook changing their name to Meta. And, I think in one regard, it's interesting that the AEC industry, maybe some are interested, some aren't that interested because it doesn't seem relevant. But, I like to think of, the metaverse for business as being digital twin and all the functionality that can kind of be hung on a functioning model of a building and a smart building. Then you mentioned building lifecycle management. But are people drawing a line from, BIM to building the as-built to digital twin smart building to smart cities to ultimately the AR cloud, which is arguably a digital twin of the entire planet? Is that on the roadmap for standards, and are people thinking about it now?
I think there's probably a few people that are thinking about it. They are trying to draw those connection lines right now. I think there's a lot of effort in trying to draw a connection between BIM and digital twin. It's interesting that when you say digital twin, that is still for a lot of people an undefined concept and idea, and there's still some debate about a good definition for that. And then ultimately, you're right, having those in place, having good data leads to, being able to adequately populate the metaverse and, smart cities and beyond. So I think there are visionaries in our industry. There are visionaries in technology that see this as it is imminent, and they're trying to get out in front of it. They're participating in work groups, trying to help to define what that is and try to help connect the dots and draw the lines. From my perspective, as working on this national BIM program, and there's digital twin is intertwined in that as well. My perspective is that we are still lacking the good fundamental data that makes all of this happen and available. And the whole premise behind the National BIM program was that we realized there was that we're not really operating under a common open standards. And so a lot of content that is created, a lot of data that is created, as it's passed off from one stakeholder to another, some of that information may be dropped or lost. Some of that information may be coupled to a particular application or program, and then so it doesn't translate or convert out of one program and into another. And so at the fundamental core, we don't have we're not operating on the same level of open standards that the information that is created, the data that we transition into information and to share that information is fully interoperable, is correct, able to transfer from one stakeholder to another, and then ultimately feed into, what we envision would be, a metaverse or an AR cloud.
And are you getting as granular as, from the standards perspective, as file formats and how to move, one 3D asset, to another, realm, let's say from, augmented reality to virtual reality? Are you looking at any of that, or do you feel like that's a little bit beyond the pale for what your remit is?
Yeah, we're not looking at applications as much as and not looking at applications and tools as much as we are looking at uh, ultimately, when the work is done in this application or tool, can it be fully exported or communicated or transferred out of this application and maintain its full fidelity? And to be able to do that, it has to operate on a basic, consistent, and open standard, very much like cell phones, regardless of our carrier. They operate on a standard that allows us to make calls to each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. And then in terms of just your own interest in the industry, obviously you're very passionate about the industry. What are some of the technologies that you think are having the most impact? And do you think it's a sort of a slow burn for adoption with some of these technologies?
Yeah, I mean, cloud technology is obviously a key aspect to be able to handle the amount of data that we need to mine, we need to process, and then make available and make usable to facilitate business process and decision making. That amount of data is without question, it happens in a cloud environment. All of those activities happen in a cloud environment. So I would say cloud advancements in cloud is key. I think a very important aspect of that is being responsible with that technology as it is emerging, so that it maintains security. It protects the data, people's information, and information about their buildings or facilities is not put at risk. So there is that balance always going forward of pushing for innovation, but also doing so responsibly, that we maintain security of that information.
And then, touched on, kind of building life cycle management. How important is, AI going to be into that, moving in the future on, kind of closed loop optimization and monitoring systems? Like, what are some of the things that you're seeing in that arena?
So I think AI is very important. I think it'll play an important role as it continues to develop, and as there's more adoption of AI in the building industry. So I see it not only in design, in helping to iterate through and find the best layout, as well as construction, identifying beforehand safety issues or other issues that it may capture. But in facilities management, I also see that AI is going to play a very important role in when that facility or those who are running that facility need to make changes, move people around, uh, evaluate their assets. AI could play an important role to help guide those decision makers. Ultimately, AI I see is an important role in facilitating those who are making the decisions, making the best decisions possible.
And what advice would you give to owners now? Because I feel for people in this position, because there is just this barrage of technology kind of coming, and the economics are so slim, especially during the construction phase, and one mistake can result in millions of additional cost. But what advice would you give to owners in terms of how to really navigate all of the technology that comes down? Certainly standards would be number one, but what are some of the other things that you would advise owners to start really paying attention to?
I would suggest play the long game. Realize it's not just about the capex, the capital expense at the front end of any given project. Think about how the decisions made during the design and construction, even though some of them may be at times more costly decisions, how that's going to impact the total cost of ownership for that given facility or campus or group of buildings. So think about the long game. But I would also say that, and this is a key aspect of the BIM program that we've launched at the National Institute of Building Sciences, is there's a entire focus group on owner leadership, where we're trying to build a community of owners that can share their case studies with other owners, share guidance and suggestions with other owners. So I would say other owners who have already been on the front end of this innovation curve, they're the early adopters. Many of them have worked through some of these challenges, and I would say get involved with other owners. The National BIM program is an excellent place to plug into that. and hear from other owners what they're doing, what challenges that they've overcome and they faced and overcome, and then how they did that. And so, I don't purport to have all the answers, or even our groups and committees don't. We realize that the best answer is really going to come from the collective thought of an entire community. And so we're building that community of owners. Get involved. Don't I would suggest avoid just jumping from one application to another or one service to another. That's where it does get very expensive. So plan that out like you would any other aspect of your business, your due diligence, and plan out those pieces and play for the long game.
I think that is great advice, and I would urge anyone to reach out. I assume they can find all this information on your website. So I think that's a great solution, and I think that's the knowledge sharing is really, really important, especially now because there's just a barrage coming at us from all sides. So let's shift gears. I'm going to ask you the question that I ask everyone. So imagine yourself 20, 25 years in the future, and you can bring with you any product, service, gadget that just makes your life better or easier, just makes you personally happy. What would it be and what would it do?
I think it would. Mine might be rather simple, but I think it would be, some very intelligent contact lenses. I've seen like these, the headsets and the other pieces, and to a degree, wearable technology is trying to evolve, and I would love to, and I wear contact lenses every day. I would love for them to be smart. Like I would love to be able to put in a pair of contact lenses and them be connected, them be able to provide data about something that I'm looking at. It would be on demand. So maybe with hand motion in front of whatever direction I'm looking at, I could bring up information about a digital asset, whatever it is, or I could, I could tap into a larger and broader data set to give me more information, and it would have a super zoom feature. Like, I mean, it would,
Oh, yeah.
so like if I'm out like listening to the birds or whatever, and there's one that's way away, I could completely zoom way in without needing binoculars or any other. Yeah. So a
I
super,
love that.
super duper contact lens. I don't know how it would work. It seems physically impossible, but
No. I love that. And you're going to get your wish in early form well before 20 years from now, because there's a company called Mojo Vision doing exactly that. I'll send you some information.
oh wow, interesting.
Well, Johnny, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity to share in this message and tell people about the program. Would encourage folks to stop by our website and get involved.
Excellent.